Hello and welcome to the Gentlemen's Assembly. Today we have the honor of speaking with Dr. Walter Block, renowned economist, libertarian scholar, and author of numerous groundbreaking works. Among them is The Privatization of Roads and Highways, the text we will be discussing with him today. This text advocates for the privatization of roads and highways, arguing that a free market system would be more efficient and safer than government command. The author critiques existing economic analyses of highway safety and congestion, claiming they wrongly focus on proximate causes instead of the fundamental issue of government ownership. Additionally, he pins responsibility on the government managers of said roads for the roughly 40,000 road fatalities each year. Several objections to privatization are addressed, including concerns about eminent domain, blockades, and the provision of public roads. The author presents a historical overview of private roads and proposes solutions for managing traffic congestion and ensuring highway safety under private ownership, while also discussing related issues like immigration and the role of automobile insurance.
Right, and something I've noticed among all of the statists who are against anarcho-capitalism and libertarianism is one of their first questions they always ask is, what about the roads? What will we do with the roads? We need the roads. So Walter Block has an answer to that in this book, and I'd like for you to give a short summary of what your thoughts are that we should do with the roads.
Well, yes. When Jason read that opening statement, it sounded good to me. My main motivation is 40,000 people a year die. I mean, 40,000 people is a lot of people. And it's every year, not just 1 year or, I don't know, unknown or not otherwise. To put this in context, how many people died in Katrina? Only 1,900. How many people died in 9/11? 3,000. Now, 1,900 and 3,000 deaths is something that we should not be very happy with. But those were one at a time events. There was only one Katrina, happily. There was only one 9/11, happily. This is 40,000 people, which puts in the shade those two deaths. And it puts in the shade because it's every year. I mean, and then I don't know how many offhand, how many people get seriously injured on highways, not fatalities, just hospitalization, several 100,000. Probably there's nobody in the United States that doesn't know someone who knows someone who was either killed or very seriously injured. So that's my main motivation for writing this book. My second motivation, much less important, is congestion. I mean, we sit in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and the fastest way to get around is, I don't know, bicycle or a scooter or skates or, something like that. Maybe even a good marathon runner could go faster than the traffic. That's also problematic because a lot of productivity isn't created while people are sitting there twiddling their thumbs in their car, and a lot of gas is wasted while they're just sitting in their car. But that's a minor motivation for me. The main motivation is fatalities and serious injuries. Okay, so why do I think that privatization of roads would improve things? And you're quite right. Whenever you try to convert people to libertarianism or to free enterprise, their first question, well, there are two questions. What about the poor? And what about the roads? And about the poor, welfare will not help them. The best way to eradicate poverty is, as Adam Smith said in his Wealth of Nations, have free enterprise. And then the poor will be richer. I mean, in countries where we have free enterprise, the poor have colored TVs, they have air conditioning, they have a car, maybe not a Maserati, and maybe not even a new Volkswagen, but they have a Chevy of 15 years old, and that's pretty good. Whereas in countries that don't have free enterprise, even the middle class doesn't have that. But we're not here to discuss the problem of the poor. We're here to discuss the problem of the roads. Why do I think that privatization of roads would do better? Well, because I believe that competition brings about a better product. I mean, here's a cough drop, and we have competition in cough drop manufacture, and we have pretty good cough drops. Here's a pen, and no real complaints about pens, and yet there's competition. And here's a shirt, and here are glasses, and I don't know, here's a deck of cards, and in all of these provisions, we have competition. We don't have monopoly, and we don't have government provision. We have private enterprise producing these things, and I'm just picking stuff at random off my desk, and there are no problems. And we should appreciate, they say a fish doesn't appreciate the water because it's in the water. And we don't appreciate pens and paper clips and cough drops and stuff because, they're readily available. So my idea is if we had competition in roads, it couldn't be worse. I mean, maybe we would have better results. So the first half of my book is what could private owners do to make it safer? And the second half of the book is objections. Objections to private ownership. Like if I owned a private road, I would hem you in and charge you $1 million every time you wanted to get out of your house or back into your house. Do we need eminent domain to have private roads? A whole bunch of objections. But before we get to the objections, let's talk about what private enterprise could possibly do to alleviate these horrible fatalities. Well, one possibility right now, all the rules of the road come from Washington, D.C., and they apply to all 50 states, and there's no laboratories. There aren't 50 laboratories or 100 laboratories where you try on Jason's road, you do this, on Patrick roads, you do that, on my road, you do a third thing, and then we see which saves lives better. There's none of that, and we should have that. Okay, well, right now, on the highway, Highway 10 goes right by New Orleans, where I'm a professor at Loyola University. And the minimum speed is 40 and the maximum speed is 70. And that's the rules of the road in terms of speed. Would it be better? I'm just speculating that in the right-hand lane, everyone has to do 55. And in the middle lane, everyone has to do 70. And in the left lane, everyone has to do 85, to just pick three numbers. It doesn't have to be 50, 65, and 80. It could be 55, 65, and 75. It could be any number of speed. In other words, in the right lane, let's just say it's 60, and in the middle lane, it's 70, and the left lane is 80. Would that save lives? I don't know. I think it might. Because a lot of problem, somebody's doing 70 in the left lane, and in a clear day, he's holding up traffic, and everyone's going around him to try to get ahead of him because he's slowing things down. And most people do 75 or 77 or something like that. And there are a lot of lane changes. So maybe it's lane changes that create havoc on the roads, and 60, 70, and 80 would be much better because everybody had to do in the right lane, you have to do 60. Otherwise, you get a ticket. If you're doing 61 or 59, you're getting a ticket. Well, 69, 59 or 61, what the heck. But you have to do pretty much 60 in the right lane, 70 in the middle, and 80 in the left lane. Maybe that would save lives. We don't know. You see, that's the problem. The rules of the road don't come from on high. They don't come in the Ten Commandments. God didn't stipulate these. We have to, human beings have to come up with rules of the road that would be better. And we have to have some sort of experiments. Now, you have to have a limit to how much experiments you can have. I mean, you can't go berserk because then when you go from one road to another, people wouldn't be able to adjust. I remember when Sweden went from driving on one side of the road, I forget which it was, to the other side of the road. It was a whole year that they had to give announcements as to what's going on. And every week there'd be another announcement. And then last month, every day, practically every hour, they would say, on July 3rd at 3 o'clock, we're moving on the other side of the road. So you can't get too different. But I don't think that 60, 70, and 80 is that crazy. Now, look, it's true that on today's roads, if they say slower traffic go to the right. But did they ever give anyone a ticket for doing 70 in the left lane? No, because 70 is the maximum speed. And how can they give you a ticket for doing 70? So the whole thing is just messed up. So one suggestion that I have for reducing fatalities is 60, 70, and 80, or any three numbers, but each lane should have its own number. Okay, another suggestion I have for improving traffic fatalities is whenever a traffic fatality occurs, put a cross or a Jewish star or a Muslim, whatever the Muslims use, but it should be 50 feet high. Scare the bejesus out of people. I don't know, would that work? Maybe on my road I would try it, and maybe on Patrick Road you wouldn't do it, and Jason would do it, and we'd have three different principles or three different rules of the road, and then we'd take very careful statistics of how many people die, and at the end of the month or at the end of the year, we'd be in a position to say, well, this worked or it didn't work, or something. Another possibility is, I don't know about you guys, but every once in a while I see two trucks, one right ahead of the other, and it's just a two-lane highway, two lanes going this way, two lanes going the other way. And I know that this truck is going to try to pass that truck, and it's going to take 15 miles because these trucks are going to have a race. And what I'll do, and I probably shouldn't admit this, and if the cops, okay, I don't really do this. What I do is I floor it. And I try to get ahead of these guys so that I'm not wasting time for 15 miles or 15 minutes or whatever it is watching these guys race. So on my road, what I would do is I would give a ticket to the truck on the right side who won't let the other guy pass. Might this help? Yeah, I think it would help because people are like me and they'll start flooring it. And when you floor it up to 95, that's dangerous. And this would reduce deaths if people didn't have that incentive. And one way for them not to have that incentive is to tell the trucking people, stop racing and stop blocking everybody out. And, you know, if the guy can pass you, slow down for 30 seconds and let him pass so that the traffic can get around. So these are three different things. And I must have, I don't know, 15 or 20 different suggestions as to how entrepreneurs of roads might do it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. I found it very interesting, actually, that early in the book, you do blame these fatalities on the government, and people don't think about it, but it makes total sense. I mean, if you go to an amusement park and somebody's just dying every few minutes on this ride, are you going to be like, wow, these people must have been shaking the carts, jumping up and down. Maybe they got on the carts drunk. Who knows what these people were doing? Bad weather that day, you know, the tracks froze up and they just flew right off. No, you would blame the ride manager. And
Speaking of drunken driving, I would be very, very nasty about drunken driving. I mean, none of this $300 ticket. You lose your car, or you go to jail, or you know something very serious on my road. Now maybe other roads wouldn't do that. And look, you know, there's nothing per se wrong with getting drunk. It's just that it's on my road. And I have private property. So, I mean, the libertarian might object, well, you know, people should be able to get drunk. Sure, they should be able to get drunk, but not on my road. Or, well, that is while they're driving. I don't care if you're lying in the back seat of your car. And, you know, sometimes they'll arrest people for sleeping in the back seat of their car, drunk. But they're not endangering anyone. They're just sitting on the side of the road and maybe lying in the back and they're drunk, but that shouldn't give you a ticket. But driving while under the influence, either of drugs, and look, I favor legalization of drugs and certainly legalization of booze, but to drive, I think on my road, I would have much more serious penalties if you were driving drunk.
And one thing that I know a lot of people would express concern with when hearing things like that and with competition with different standards in roads is people will naturally have some concern with the universality of more baseline laws. Like people want to be able to understand what they're doing when they're out driving, and people might be concerned that they'd have to learn the rules of every single road they'd want to be on with great depth. And I'd wonder what you might say to someone who would have those concerns.
Well, I think that's a very good concern, and that there's a limit to how different any road could be. I mean, suppose on my road I said you couldn't go forward, you had to back up. I mean, isn't that silly? You had to go in reverse on my road. Nobody would come on my road. The owners, the board of directors would fire me if I were the manager and if I said anything that grotesque. But 60, 70, and 80 isn't so weird that people coming from a different road from maybe minimum 40, maximum 70 couldn't understand readily. And on each lane, I would say, you must do 60, or you must do 70, or you must do 80. So there's a limit as to how different you can be. But look, there's a limit as to how different you can be in restaurants. I mean, suppose in my restaurant, I said, in order to be in my restaurant, you had to walk in on your hands. Right? You couldn't walk in on your feet. You had to walk in on your hands. You had to crawl. That would be weird. Nobody'd come to my restaurant. So there's a sort of a natural limit as to how different you can get. But I think in the book I do articulate that you can't be too different than everyone else, but you could be a little different than everyone else. You could say that there'd be severe penalties for drunken driving on a sign. And you could do the 60, 70, and 80, nice round numbers, and you could put the star, the Jewish star, or the Catholic Protestant cross on the road. And I don't think that would be so weird and so different that people would get confused, and that the confusion would create more accidents. I mean, we don't want that. So you're right. There is a limit as to how different each road owner could be. But the limit is not zero. They don't all have to be exactly the same. So on my road, it's 60, 70, and 80, and on your road, it's 70, 80, and 90, or 50, 60, and 70. Well, probably not 50, 60, and 70, but so I agree with you that there is a limitation as to how different you can be, because then people wouldn't understand what's going on, and the confusion would create accidents. But within a certain limitation, and I think the limitation is pretty wide, that we could try a whole bunch of things and see what works. But I mean, that's the essence of capitalism, to see what works and try something new. That's how we move from black and white TV to color TV. That's how we move from a typewriter to a laptop. That's how we moved, I don't know, from fans to air conditioning. People try something new, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work and you keep doing it, you're going to go broke. Someone else is going to take over. And that's why, again, I hate to say it, with the pen and the cough drops and the deck of cards and all, that's why we have pretty good things. And why we shouldn't try to apply this to roads is beyond me.
Right. There's a lot of different ways that they can restrict too much variance in the market as well. And one of the big business models you use in your book is where the individual drivers can be feed or something, where they're driving on the road, maybe there's something on the top of their car gets scanned, and they get a bill for it later. Another business model, which could also maybe work, would be all these roads, well, they go to different businesses and locations. These businesses would be willing to fund these roads, because if you don't have people getting an ability to get to your business, it's useless, right?
Yeah,
So
we now
this
have
business, so these businesses would be incentivized to tell this road manager, well, we want to keep things basically the same, but get them here quick and alive, and you have that amount of freedom to work within those parameters.
Yeah, like right now, McDonald's has a parking lot. Walmart has a parking lot. It's free, and they want you to come there. Well, it's possible that there would be a lost leader, namely a free road. Or, I mean, it would be up to the market. Some entrepreneurs would want to have a free road to get to the XYZ restaurant. Others might want to charge for it. And one objection is, you're going to have to put a nickel in every house you pass on the road. That's silly. When I started in on this, those universal product codes were starting to come into grocery stores. And my idea was, well, we stick something on the underbody of a car, electronic thing, and it registers where you are. And then there's the question of privacy. You're going to go see your proctologist, and you don't want anyone to know you're going to see your proctologist. Well, we could charge you a little more if you wanted privacy. So that would be another objection. How is the owner going to get paid for road use? And I mean, the way the government does it, on the highway, you come in and you get a ticket, and then when you leave, you pay a certain amount. Well, that's pretty inefficient. We could now do it electronically, the way they do groceries or pharmacies, or many items like that. You go to a clothing store and they've got a little ticket on there, and that registers, and they know to replace that and buy more of whatever you just bought. So I don't think that the problem of financing the private roads would be insuperable.
One thing
Right.
I am curious about is that one thing you do talk about, you touch on lightly, I believe, in your book, is the division between walkable space and drivable space in public areas. And I think you touch on how private competition would allow for better division of that, if I remember correctly. But one thing I would wonder is that there are a lot of people who are critical of modernization and capitalism and industrialization. And one thing a lot of people often bring up is the urbanization of cities in America and how nothing's walkable anymore. You have to drive across the city to get anywhere. And I'm wondering if you think that with a private model, if we had a private model rather than all the sorts of zoning that took place, if we would have a greater degree of walkable areas in cities as they exist now. Obviously, it's dependent on consumer demand, but if you would speculate that would be any different.
Yeah, well, there are really three or four uses that we have for these thoroughfares. One is a car, one is a bicycle, and now we're talking bike lanes, and another is sidewalks for walking. And we want to have a proper allocation of them. Well, look, we also want to have a proper allocation of chickens and motorcycles, to just pick two objects. I mean, we don't want to be up to our armpits in chickens and no motorcycles, nor do we want to have hardly any motorcycles and all chickens. And what mechanism keeps allocation of resources between chickens and motorcycles, or between violins and wine, appropriate? Well, if we have too many of something, people lose money producing it and they have to slow down. And if we have too few of something, there are now impetuses to produce more. And that's why we don't have any problem. There is no problem of a misallocation of resources between shoes and turkeys. Right? I mean, I'm just making up problems that don't exist, that we don't appreciate. And whereas in other countries, centrally planted, they're going to have a lot of shoes and no turkeys, or a lot of turkeys and no shoes. They're going to have those problems of central planning. Well, I'm right now, and I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and I'm in North Van, which is a very hilly place. And what they do is they get rid of car lanes and they put bike lanes all over the place. And nobody's in the bike lanes. Nobody uses those bike lanes because the hills are pretty serious. In the flats, bikes can ride more easily, but in the steep hills, only a real macho bike rider is going to venture forth. I was once in what city was it? Denmark. What's the big city in Denmark? The capital of Denmark. I'm getting senile. I can't even think.
Copenhagen?
Copenhagen. Thanks. I need all the help I can get. Copenhagen is very flat. There were hardly any cars there. Everyone was on a bike. It was the most amazing thing. You see 300 people, 500 people all riding on a bike. So the key is you want to have an allocation of bike lanes and car lanes. And the government of North Vancouver, bless its heart, is misallocating resources. And you also want to have an allocation of roads and parks, which we don't have given government and given the fact that you can't make money or lose money if you don't allocate the land between walking and running and riding a car. So I think Jason is making a very good point here. Namely, not only do we want to save lives, but we want to have a proper allocation of running, walking, biking, and riding a car. And we're not going to get that with government. I mean, what every 4 years there's a what do you call it, an election, and has anyone ever won or lost an election on the basis of this? Of course not. This is a contrived problem that we're just creating out of intellectual curiosity. But in the market, these things are taken care of automatically. But when government gets involved, there is no automatic reallocation of goods so that it conforms roughly with what people want. And as I say, in North Vancouver, there's too much emphasis, in my view, in my humble opinion, on bike lanes and not enough on car lanes. And you get 2 bike lanes, that's 1 car lane. I mean, you know, the bike lane has to be roughly half the size of a car lane to give them room to pass. So this is not a big problem, not a crisis, not like people dying needlessly, but it's a problem.
Right. And even in the public sphere of government, they do a terrible job at allocating resources for this, because they had a big incentive, I believe, maybe around the 50s for cars and mass highways and getting the whole country connected. But they didn't consider what we know now, where if a city is more walkable, you're not going to pass every business in your car and just, know nothing about it. So that gives a lot of businesses free advertisement and makes the city itself more profitable for, people who go through it. Even if we had a private government type of structure where people voluntarily gave money to some form of government and they paid for the roads, it would still be a better system than what we have now, because they'd actually profit from making these cities more profitable.
Yeah, there are intermediate cases. I mean, the extreme cases are full private enterprise or full government, and there are gray areas where you could have some sort of cooperation. But I'm more interested in the radical privatization, getting government out of it entirely. I wanted to mention some of the criticisms that have been leveled at this book, and also objections. One of them is, well, how many people would I estimate that would die under full privatization? Do I think 0? No, I don't think 0 people would die if we had full privatization. I mean, look, when cars are going at 80 miles an hour or 75 miles an hour, and the human element, we're all imperfect creatures, there are going to be some deaths. So I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm not saying there'll be 0 deaths if we privatize. I acknowledge that if we privatize, there'd be some. So what's my estimate? What I did is I extrapolated from other cases where government and private work in the same industry. And I came up with 2. One is the post office. The post office is a government post office, and then we have other private enterprises that deliver packages. That's one. Another is sanitation. We have government garbage collection and we have private garbage collection. And in all these cases, it's usually something like 4 to 1. Namely, the government is 4 times more expensive, or for a given dollar, the private enterprise can do 4 times as much. So I extrapolated. How do I know how many people would die if we had private enterprise? I mean, the whole thing is preposterous, but we have to come up with some sort of estimate. And what I said is, look, right now it's 40,000, and if we go with a 4 to 1 model, 10,000 people will die. I don't know if that's true, but you can't say 0 people would die, because that we want to be realistic. And to be realistic, you're driving at 75, 80 miles an hour. there are going to be some deaths, even under the best circumstances of private enterprise. I mean, private enterprise is great, but it's not, I shouldn't say it's not a miracle. It's sort of a miracle, but the human condition is still there. There are going to be deaths. So the objection is that, well, therefore, the government is not responsible for 40,000 deaths. It's only responsible for 30,000 deaths. And I say, no, the government is still responsible for 40,000 deaths. And the model that I use is Hitler. Let's stipulate that Hitler killed 6 million Jews. But it took him 4 or 5 years to do it. And during that time, let's stipulate, arguendo, that 100,000 people would have died of natural causes. So, did he kill 6 million or did he kill 5.9 million? No, he killed 6 million, even though 100,000 people would have died apart from his machinations. So in like manner, I reject the argument that the government is only responsible for 30,000 deaths. I say it's responsible for 40,000 deaths, even though with under private enterprise, there still would be stipulated 10,000 deaths. So it's a little complicated issue, but we're trying to delve deeply into these issues, and that's an objection that's been leveled at the book. I say the government is responsible for all those deaths, even though 10,000 would have died anyway, and not just for 30,000. Another objection is this idea that what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge you $1 million every time you come into your house and every time you leave your house. I'm going to trap you in your house. Well, as Patrick said before, the road owner wants people to use the road, right? And if he does something like that, nobody's going to locate their house there. So if you have a road, Patrick, and you want me to locate there, you have to obligate yourself not to do that. You have to offer me some sort of contract saying, well, I'll never charge you, Walter, any more than I charge anyone else. Or I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how this can be done, but you'd have to obligate yourself not to do that. And you'd have every incentive not to do that because, doing that is bankruptcy. I mean, if you could trap people that way, but this is an objection to private ownership, that the private owner would trap people in their house or not let them get back into their house. No, the private owner would do no such thing. The private owner would, look, under free enterprise, the customer is always right. Well, we don't want to go that far. The customer isn't always right. But the emphasis is if you want to make money on the free enterprise, you have to satisfy customers. Well, one way to satisfy customers is to not trap them in their house and demand $1 million every time they go in or out. So I think that objection is by the boards.
Right. Another point you also made was some people might say, oh, what about the lunatics on the road who want to go 1,000 miles an hour, drive drunk, do drugs while they're driving, maybe nurse their baby at the same time. What are we going to do about those people? And your answer was, well, it's a free market. Segregate them to their own roads.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that like to have chicken races.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who veers off is a chicken. Well, that's okay. Those deaths, by the way, would be acceptable. I mean, if you're young and crazy and you want to do that, and on my road at 3 in the morning, what I do at 3 in the morning is I say all the north-south traffic has to go on one side. Mm-hmm. And now on the other side, we have chicken races. If people want to do that, what the heck? I think in one of my publications, I had a thing called Murder Park, where I have a park and it's got thick walls. Think of a football stadium, and I give everyone a pistol with 6 bullets. And I say, when I ring the bell, you can shoot anyone. Well, it's a little weird and it makes libertarians look bad because we're now in favor of murder, but this isn't murder. This is something different. Well, if people want to do that and entrepreneurs would supply that, that would be okay. Another point that you mentioned was mother breastfeeding the baby. And this brings me to HOV lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes. My daughter-in-law has twin boys, and they were age 2, and she's in the HOV lane. She's got 3 people. And then there are doctors and lawyers and engineers and scientists who can produce at 500 an hour or 800 an hour, and they're sitting in bumper to bumper lanes. And my daughter-in-law and the 2 grandchildren are whisking around town because they have 3 people. This is lunacy. I mean, it's not as serious as deaths, but it's a misallocation of resources. The HOV shouldn't be based on number of people. You get 5 busboys, each of whom can produce at the rate of $20 an hour. And together they can produce at the rate of 100 an hour, and they can go wherever they want because there are 5 people in there. Whereas you get a doctor or a lawyer who can produce 1,000 an hour, and they're stuck in traffic. This is no way to run a railroad, to mix my metaphors. So that would be yet another problem with the present situation. I also was sort of running out of time, but I wanted to get to eminent domain. Eminent domain is very important because look, where are you now, Jason? What city are you located in?
I'm in Nebraska area.
Nebraska. Where are you, Patrick?
I'm in northern Indiana.
Okay, so from Nebraska to Indiana is, I don't know, 1,000 miles, give or take. And we want to build a road from Indiana to Nebraska. And we're going to start buying up property. Well, how many people own property between those 2 places? 1,000? 5,000? I don't know. A lot of people. Well, our first attempt to build the road is as the crow flies, a straight shot, because that would minimize transportation costs. And now we have the holdout problem. And my favorite holdout is Cartman from South Park. If you're not into Cartman and South Park, you're not really a libertarian. No, I'm kidding about that, but that's a great libertarian cartoon. And Cartman says, what Cartman is famous for is the following statement: "Screw you guys, screw you guys, screw you guys." That's his shtick. That's his thing. So Cartman says, "Sure, you can build a road through my property. That'll be $1 trillion, please." And if we have to pay $1 trillion, we're not building a road. And then our critics will say, well, at least you need the government to have eminent domain to declare Cartman's land. We'll pay him a fair market value based on the transactions near Cartman's holdings. And so that's one problem. One solution is, well, we don't have to have as the crow flies. We can go 15 miles north or 15 miles south. It doesn't have to be exactly as the crow flies. We could get loops, various loops of roads, and we'll go around them. And then the problem is, and I discussed this with my son for about 2 years, from his age 14 to 16, and we discussed nothing but this eminent domain problem. And at the end of it, I wrote it up and I made him a co-author. And he said, well, no one would believe that I'm a co-author. I said, well, I don't care what people believe. Is it true? Yeah, it was true. I wrote it all, but we discussed this. And now let's say that the only viable road is 15 miles north and 15 miles south of Cartman. And he owns a whole north-south area, which will prevent our road from Nebraska to Indiana. Well, what's the answer? The answer is we build a tunnel under Cartman's holdings, or what do you call it? A bridge over. Now, there is this thing called ad coelum, ADCOELUM, something like ad coelum. The ad coelum doctrine is that if you own a square mile of land on the surface of the earth, you own a cone down to the core of the earth, and you own a cone up into the skies. Well, we libertarians don't believe in the ad coelum doctrine, because we believe in private property rights. We're Lockeans, John Lockean, and John Locke said the way you get to own land is by mixing your labor with it. Well, Cartman never mixed his labor with land 2 miles down. Cartman never mixed his labor with 50 feet above him. I mean, by the way, if he could own 50,000 feet above him, what would happen with airplanes? I mean, if anyone homesteaded 50,000 feet above Cartman, it was not Cartman, it was the airline companies that homesteaded the path, the right to go there. So we can build a bridge under Cartman, or over Cartman, or we could build a tunnel under Cartman, which means that you can have, what do you call it? A slant drilling. I own property next to you, Patrick, and what I do is I go down and then under your property, and I get oil or gold or whatever it is. Would this be allowed? Yes, as long as I don't cave in your buildings. And in Manhattan, I can go pretty close to underneath your building because it's a solid rock. Whereas in New Orleans, it's built on a swamp. So if I'm going to do slant drilling under your contiguous property, I got to go way down so that I don't cave in your buildings. Which doesn't mean that it's arbitrary. It just means that I can't cave in your buildings. So anyway, but Cartman is too smart for this. So you know what Cartman does? He starts putting sticks down under his under his property and sticks up above his property to preclude us putting a bridge or a tunnel. And now we get into football theory. So what's football theory? Football theory is that if you're on your own goal line and you got the whole football field ahead of you, it's easier to get territory, to get yardage, than if you're on a goal line stand and you're 3 feet away from the other guy's goal. And now it's very hard to get those 3 feet because you don't have, all you have is the end zone to work with. Right? Everyone following this?
Yeah.
It's much easier to get land to make yardage in football when you're on your own goal than when you're trying to broach the other guy's goal. Well, Cartman has to defend 30 miles. Remember, because his holdings are 15 miles north and 15 miles south. He's got to defend an end zone of 30 miles. And how big is our football? Well, how big is a three-lane highway or a 6-lane highway? Well, each lane is 10 feet wide. So that's 60 feet. And then you need a median of, I don't know, another 40 feet. So it's 100 feet. So all we have to do is get 100 feet through 15 miles. He can't put that many sticks there. So that is our analysis of why we don't need eminent domain. And now I had a very distinguished critic come at me, Gordon Tullock. Gordon Tullock didn't win the Nobel Prize in economics, but he almost did because his many-time co-author, Jim Buchanan, did win the Nobel Prize. And Gordon Tullock, criticized this football theory. And then I alone, my son now was more interested in nerd computers and not in this as much. And now he was maybe 20, 22 years old. So I got into a debate with Gordon Tullock over whether you needed eminent domain or not. And I published last. So I'm right. I'm kidding about that. I think that I answered his objections sufficiently. But that's just another complication of this thing, because we libertarians, we really want to have private roads and we don't want to have the government involved at all. And it's very easy to see or to think that you really need eminent domain in order to have a road from Indiana to Nebraska. And my claim is you don't really need it. And in Manhattan, there are roads one above the other. On the FDR Drive, the East River Drive. So if I have a road from Boston to LA, and you want to build a road above me, I can't stop you. So we can have competition, just roads right on top. I don't know how many stories of roads you could have, maybe 4 or 5. I'm not sure there's got to be a limit. You can't have an infinite number of roads. But you see, another objection is, well, you really can't have competition. Well, you can. You just build above. And the guy below can't say that you can't build above me because I own the air or something. Now, the problem here, and I went into this in the book, is, well, then you're precluding sunlight and rain. And the answer is, I used to drive a motorcycle, and when you get those meshes, it's very hard for the motorcycle I don't know if you guys are into that. You build that road with a mesh, namely, there are air holes for the rain to get in and translucent stuff for the sun to get in. So if the guy below insists, you could build a road that way. And probably he's not going to insist, and there'd be some sort of financial arrangement so that you don't have to build the road that way. But if he insisted, you could build the road in a way that would not preclude him getting sunlight. Not that he really needs sunlight for a road or rain. I don't know about that. But so what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of complications here. And the book goes into many obscure objections. But I'm very happy with that book. I think it was published in 2009, which is, I don't know, 15 years old, and about 15 years old. And I think well, we don't have any private roads yet, but we libertarians are not in control. And maybe Donald Trump is, we've got Musk and Vivaswamy, Vivek, and, who knows? It's conceivable that at least, we try one sort of a thing like that. I think in, where was it, Brazil, they tried something like that. Some sort of quasi-demi private road like Patrick you were talking about, where I think in Brazil they had a government road and they rented it out to a private concern, and they said, look, you pay us and now you're running the road for 10 years or whatever it is, and then they put in restaurants in there, and they ran the road. And it would be good to do research to see if there were fewer deaths on that road than on other roads. So, maybe it's possible. I don't know.
By the way, I did just do a quick check out of curiosity, and Google's saying that your book was originally published in 2006, which would mean that nobody's been listening for nearly 20 years. So,
I thought it was 2009, but I've written so many books, I don't remember exactly the publication date of each one. 2006 would make it almost 20 years, but that's the fate of libertarian books. That's the fate of libertarianism. Look, Ron Paul ran for office, and Ron Paul is magnificent. And Ron Paul got, the usual 2, 3, 4% of the vote. So libertarianism is more theoretical than practical. But still, we enjoy doing this. It's fun, and it's practical in the sense that if it was implemented, it would be good. And look, there are certain gains we've made. It used to be that alcohol was prohibited by law. It no longer is, and prostitution is legal in Nevada, which is good. So we've made some progress. Although I wouldn't credit with libertarians because we're not in control. Although look at Javier Milei. Javier Milei is a libertarian, and he is doing magnificent work in Argentina. I don't know if he's able to do private roads, but he got rid of rent control. He's lowering taxes, inflation, regulation, tariffs. I mean, he is just magnificent. And every once in a while, we get somebody like that. Look, Israel started, they were a socialist country. Under Netanyahu and Likud, they're much more free enterprise. Not as free enterprise as I'd like, but much more than when they started. So, and look, Donald Trump is way closer to libertarianism than Kamala the commie. So we have some things to be thankful for.
That's true, and I believe if there were private roads, I've noticed sometimes that in the current market we have right now, where there's, gas versus electric, the more rural areas are more dependent on gas, the more urban areas are not dependent on, but much more popularizing electric because they have charging stations everywhere. Could that be a problem within the road network where some road owners might want to do gas only, others might want to do electric cars, and these could even have their benefits. Like an electric car road could have Maybe it could auto charge your car with UV lights in a tunnel or something, right?
And not only EV versus gas, but also what do you call it? Cars, automatic cars where there's no driver,
Oh yeah, self-driving.
self-driving cars. That might be the future. I don't know. It's possible that AI can drive a car better than a human being, and then all of this stuff that I wrote about would sort of go away because there'd be no 10,000 deaths. There might be 5 deaths, or if the computers were that good, which would obviate everything I've done. I mean, if the government could implement a system of driverless cars and it really worked well, maybe not perfectly. So instead of 40,000 or 10,000, there'd be 100 deaths, let's say, because the computers are not perfect. Well, 100 deaths is pretty good compared to 10,000 or 40,000. And that would pretty much obviate everything I've done. Obviate everything I've done specific to roads, but not obviate everything I've done based on the benefits of free enterprise. Because look, all I'm doing is taking what Hazlitt in Economics and Lesson did, and what Ayn Rand did in Atlas Shrugged, and what Mises did in Human Action, and what Rothbard did in I don't know, Man, Economy, and State. I'm trying to apply Economics 101 or Libertarianism 101 to an area where it hasn't been applied to. So I'm trying to make a contribution. So even if technology obviates all of this, it won't obviate the idea of applying basic libertarian economic free enterprise principles to whatever it. My motto is: if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. Everything either moves or doesn't move, so privatize everything. By the way, I love that sign behind you, Patrick. Private road. How did you get that?
I looked for some good images on Google for private roads.
That's a great one. So part of what I'm doing is practical. Namely, if implemented, it would save lives. I'm pretty sure. But a much more important part of it is rounding out libertarianism. And as you say, whenever you get a new convert, they're going to ask, well, who would provide the roads? Well, now you can point them in the direction of this book. And I think it's the only book on this subject. Other people should write more stuff on this. I'm surprised other people haven't jumped on this bandwagon. But maybe this interview will inspire some younger people to take what I've done and stand on my shoulders, as I've stood on the shoulders of the people who came before me, Mises, Rothbard, Ron Paul, people like that.
Right. Not very many libertarians have ever really. The best you'll usually see is somebody will say, well, the government needs to on the roads. Well, what do we do? A libertarian can respond with, we've had private roads, but that's about as far as it goes, where they'll say, well, we've had private roads. The roads weren't always public. This is pretty good, but with your book and this interview, of course, it furthers the argument that not only have we had it before, it was good. People were actually to a level accountable for the roads. And there's a lot of, much needed innovation that can be done in the road and car sector that can be improved with privatization.
By the way, the first roads were private. They were not cement roads. They were not tar roads. They were dirt roads. And they had places where you could pay. And they would charge based on how many horses you had on your wagon and how many axles your wagon had and how heavy it was. They even charged on the basis of the thickness of the wheel. If the wheel was wide, they would charge you less because a dirt road would have ruts in it, and a thick wheel would sort of smooth out the ruts. On the other hand, if you had a very thin wheel, think ice skates, it would put ruts in the road. And therefore, they would charge you more if you had thin wheels rather than thick wheels. I mean, this is historical stuff, and my research went back to this stuff with the wheels was revolutionary times, 18th century, 1750 or whenever it was. But
Hmm.
the private roads in England in the 6th century. But what happened was that they refused the government. Uh, what happened was some people refused to pay for the use of the roads, and the government would not uh, allow the police to come in and make them pay. In other words, the road owners had to pay taxes, and the taxes financed the police, but they wouldn't allow the police to save them against people who wanted to cheat and ride for free.
Hmm.
A very similar thing happened in New York City with the subways. There were three subway lines. There's the BMT, the IRT, and the IND. BMT, I think, is Borough of Manhattan Transit or something like that. And there were only two, IRT and BMT, and they were charging a nickel a fare. And they were going to raise it to a dime a fare. And then the mayor of New York City, oh, no, you can't do that. We're nationalizing or municipalizing the roads, the subways.
Hmm.
Then they built the IND. But it's a sort of a similar thing as to why it didn't succeed. Because the government has a monopoly of police and armies, and they refuse to uphold the law. The law was if you want to go on my road and you have a thick wheel, you have to pay so much, a thin wheel, something else. And now you refuse. And I call the cops, and the cops say, well, I can't help you. Patrick is going to get away with non-paying. Well, you can't have a private road if you can't charge people, if you can't exclude non-payers. Now in economics, in technical economics, there's this thing called public goods with excludability and rivalrousness. But I promised you guys an hour, and we're coming to the end of the hour. But I always enjoy interviewing with you guys, and I hope in a couple of weeks or months we'll do it again on a different topic.
We'd be glad to. We'd absolutely love to.
That
Thanks
sounds
for
great.
having me.
We enjoyed as well.
Take care. Send me the
Take care.
URL when you got it.
Will do.
We will.
Thank you.
You're welcome.